put in a dip in your hip, a glide in your stride. Welcome to the mothership, the home of the travelers of the universe, with shows throughout the week. Everything you want, everything you could need. From the paranormal to the supernatural, from the spiritual to the unknown, from emotions to comedy. You can find us at Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and so much more. This is R.I.F.T Nation Network, the RNN. And now, your featured show. Shall we begin?
Show sensation streaming throughout the multiverse. Your hang place in cyberspace for paranormal news and views. Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray.
Well, welcome everybody to Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray. It's Monday night, May 6th. How you doing, Stan?
I'm doing great. Made it through the weekend. Beautiful day. Got quite a few things done around the place, so I'm in a pretty good mood.
All right, well, before we get going, you know what we got to do here.
Disclaimer time.
That's right, it's disclaimer time. This is our disclaimer from the R.I.F.T Nation Network, going out to all of our esteemed listeners. It's a sensitive and offensive content disclaimer. Please note that this podcast may contain material that some listeners may find sensitive, offensive, or disturbing. And in fact, that is true of this evening's episode. We strive to create respectful and informative content, but topics discussed may include mature themes such as violence, explicit language, or controversial subjects, triggering content, including discussions related to mental health, trauma, or other sensitive issues, explicit language. Occasionally, our guests or hosts may use strong language. While we aim to handle these topics with care and empathy, we encourage listeners to exercise discretion. If you find any content distressing, consider skipping or seeking support. Remember that this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. If you need assistance, please consult a qualified expert. All right, that said, how we doing?
Doing great. I think we're good. There we go.
All right, I did a switcheroo. I
Yeah,
pulled you a
thank you.
switcheroo. And let's welcome our guests in chat. Who we got here today? We got Ed. Hi, Ed. Welcome to the show. It's quite a Monday, I tell you what. There's been tornadoes in the neighborhood, had a big tree fall in the backyard, quite a lot of distraction, but very excited about tonight's taboo topic. It's a winner, it's a zinger. So what do you think, Stan? Should we get into it?
Let's
Or
get
do you have
into it.
news from the home front?
No news. No news.
No news from the home front? Well, something
No.
might occur to you. All right. Not going to put you on the spot. That is faux show. Here to have a good time. We welcome all travelers on the R.I.F.T. We owe everything to the Rift Nation Network for making this possible and being able to share our paranormal news and views on a Monday night with people who are up this late. And if not, hopefully you can catch us on the rebound on Restream. If you're on YouTube, shoot us a like and feel free to subscribe. We love that. Hello, hello, everybody. All right, tonight's taboo topic, drum roll please, Pentagon UFO narrative versus citizen science. All right. I've got chat in the way and I'm trying to figure this out. Here we go, hide. I'm hiding the chat. So you're in charge, Stan.
Okay.
You're in charge. All right, so tonight's topic, just to rephrase, Pentagon UFO narrative versus we the people science. Just plain folk science. We're the citizens in this scenario. All right. Before April 27th, 2020, the official government narrative promulgated by the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency in the United States, was you must be crazy to believe in UFOs. What's your first recollection of anything about a UFO, Stan? Was it a news report or pulp magazine? You know what I'm saying? Dime novel, lurid magazine cover. What's your first memory?
It was television. I want to say it was probably like an evening news report, but it would be just like just a few minutes. Unknown sighting occurred, and that would be they may show a interview, and sometimes it'll be a special program about UFO, but mostly it was showing how they was a hoax. They would show a camera angle, and then they would show a different camera angle where we show somebody would be suspending something. So it was pretty much first one was okay. Here's how they made. Here's how they fooled people, and here's how the hoax occurred.
Did they snigger?
I'm sorry.
Did casters snigger? You know what sniggering?
Yes.
Snigger, you know,
It was
that's not.
discrediting.
Yeah, like I think it was the last show I mentioned that, typically a reporter to introduce any sort of paranormal topic, whether it would be ghosts uh, or UFOs or ESP, something like that, they had to snicker. It was in the script. They would all do it, you know. If you saw a compilation of all the reports, they were all cued, ordered, or scripted to make fun of the topic as part of the mind control that you
Oh,
must be crazy to believe in UFOs. It was
mm,
just common knowledge. And if you did admit to seeing them, you were going to be ridiculed, discredited, and the government would call attention elsewhere, distract, right?
oh, they'd make fun of you. This flat. This
Yeah.
person. Okay, he came out of a bar and he saw a UFO. Yeah, right. So, like I said, it was basically I want to say disinformation and discrediting.
So we got the Phoenix with us here, wishing us all a good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We got Monica, evening all. I agree. We've got Renee, who shared us out. Bless your heart for that. All right, onward. Here we go. So, speaking of crazy, some of this craze in the media, alleged craze in the media, part of the propaganda started. The propaganda started in 1947. This is after Roswell, the crash that was denied, discredited, and ridiculed for decades and decades and decades. And people still wonder, what was it about? I mean, what was it true? Did something happen? What happened? There's a lot of haze about this actually very well documented story that's a chapter in my book, Unknown Objects, I'll show it later. Unknown Objects, the top 10 US UFO cases. It's a prominent case in US UFO history, in international UFO history. I get excited talking about this. So what happened here was that a couple. If you look at this newspaper front page out of New Mexico, before the government really started, had developed an official program on how to crack down and control the media, how to crack down on truth in the media, and how to change the truth into a lie that would be credible, plausibly deniable. I think is plausible deniability is the phrase we use now. That this story had to have plausible deniability to be able to sell to the American public. And since most people knew nothing about UFOs, anything they sold would probably be purchased by the American public. And this is what they sold. They sold an out and out lie that this was a crashed weather balloon. Now here's that photo with better resolution. It's more like the original here. What we have here is Major Jesse Marcel, who became the public liaison for Roswell, basically. He was working at the Roswell Army Airfield, abbreviated RAAF, which looks a lot like RAF, which is British, the Royal Air Force. So don't confuse the two. This was RAAF, Roswell Army Airfield. He was an intelligence officer there, and his duty, his task, his mission was to lie to the American people about what went down at Roswell. And anyone who disagreed with the official narrative was labeled a conspiracy theorist, as we explored last week, talking about David Icke, that the CIA had coined that, had applied this pejorative spin to a perfectly innocent phrase, conspiracy theorist. In 1947, they weren't talking that way yet, but only a few years later, the CIA has formalized its protocol, and now they're debunking to beat the band and ridiculing to beat the band. This was the infancy of that program, the very beginning of it. And this guy looks very put on the spot. He knows he's lying. And also, there's something very interesting and trivial about this photograph for ufologists. There is paperwork on the floor near him somewhere in here. There's printed matter, a letter, a memo. And people in the digital age, this is an analog picture, but in the digital age, people have scanned this photograph and tried to blow up this memo that's on the floor. And it's the memo instructing this guy to lie about that's saying, yeah, there's a UFO, but we can't tell anybody about it. Were you alive in 1947, Stan? I know I'm putting you on the spot. I
No,
was
no,
not.
no.
I was not.
10 years later, I came up on the scene, but
Yeah, exactly. I think we're contemporaries.
We'll make one comment. They discredit people. I'm a scientist, you're not. I'm a doctor, you're not. Therefore, your opinions are not as strong or don't have my expertise and that's what they've been doing here. So the guy said, well, this is a weather balloon. Why I know? Because I'm in the military and we launch weather balloons all the time. You say it's not, well, you're not here, you're at the site. So I was like, that's one of the ways they deflect the investigation.
Pull rank, as it were.
Yes.
But the problem with that was, I agree with you, but the problem with that was that, I mean, here's the point. It's easy to discredit someone who isn't a trained observer of some kind. That would be a pilot, whether civilian or military, or any of a number of military personnel types, branches, and stations or roles, duties. People outside are often people stationed outside are often trained to be observant. Why wouldn't you be in the military? You're a trained observer, and if you're in aeronautics at all, you're going to be observing things in the sky. If you do astronomy or anything like that, you're going to be observing the sky. In fact, you have an agricultural background, and you observe the sky quite a bit as an amateur, or as an as a professional agriculturalist, right? But that doesn't bear the same weight as a Navy pilot, for example.
No.
According to the government. But what do you think, as just a regular person? Do you agree that a so-called trained observer, such as a military pilot or a commercial pilot, that the testimony of such a person has more weight, credibility, credence than that of, say, you or me. Is that a valid hypothesis?
My observation may not be, I may not know the terminology, where a trained professional may say these kind of clouds or this atmospheric condition was occurring. May was a mirage, maybe atmospheric conditions were correct for that. But what my observations are real to me. Just by probably not being trained, I may not be able to qualify them as a military or commercial pilot, but I did see something, then I would say it is true to me.
Do you think that your opinion as a, say, untrained or less trained observer, less trained,
Mm-hmm.
people who hunt in the woods are trained observers. They've trained themselves to observe the woods.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a person who observes things, if you are an observant person, you observe things. Clearly, it's self-defining. So, is it justifiable, do you suppose, that the military and governmental position is that our trained observers are more valid than your civilian observers? Is that truthful? Is that logical even? Is it reasonable? Stan.
Can we see, I say, one thing from multiple perspective? And whereas UFOs or I want to say any phenomenon, anything that we view, like so, we're seeing it from one perspective, and somebody else is seeing it from a completely other perspective. Does that discredit mine because I don't have that expertise? I'm going to say no. Like I said, because I am observing something.
Let me give you an analogy. There's an apple on a table.
Okay, with you.
A famous impressionist painter is going to paint that apple, is looking at that apple and is going to paint it. And then you come along. Clearly, this wouldn't happen because the technologies aren't contemporary, but bear with this fantasy.
Okay.
You've got a painter who's going to, a skilled painter who's going to paint the apple. And then you've got you or me or anybody else walking into the room with a cell phone that has a camera and casually just taking a snap, just taking a quick
Mm-hmm.
pic of the apple. Is the painter's perception of the apple more valid, more reliable, more true than your or my picture of the apple, just coming in and going, oh, that's an apple, I want to take a picture of it. I don't really know what I'm doing, but does it change the apple?
The apple did not change.
The apple did not change.
No.
So I just wonder, I've always wondered about how convenient it is for the US government to say basically our observers are better than your observers. But the bugaboo is that government also said some of our observers are just as bad as the rest of y'all. And I'm talking about the Navy pilots specifically who saw countless UFOs and suffered a lot of psychological damage because they couldn't talk about it. They feared reprisal, ridicule, all the things we just talked about, discreditation. And it was clear from their peers that if they even talked about it on the ship, they were going to be laughing stock. Who wants that? Who wants that from the people you work with every day? Nobody. Nobody in their right mind would want that. So the government position was nothing to see here, no matter how egregious it was, no matter how many people were taken up into UFOs and returned, usually in the 1980s. And then it was Linda Moulton Howe from Colorado who broke the story on cattle mutilations, where cattle were being taken up to high altitudes and then dropped. UFOs spotted in the area, bloodless incisions with laser precision when such technology was not mainstream. It was being discussed theoretically, but laser surgery was not happening. And she broke this story. I want to say it was 1970s. I'd have to check the date, but it's been decades and decades and decades. She, of course, was reviled and discredited. Her book, The Alien Harvest, became a movie of the same title. She was in television and was producing her own articles as special reports for a Denver news station. So she basically broke this story. Other people had reported it, but no one got the prominence and press that she did. So it's one thing to think about a cattle mutilation. And by the way, viewers, if you are sensitive and squeamish, you will want to avert your eyes for the next slide because it's very graphic. And what it's showing is a bull, a male cow, that has been abducted by something, or I can't say abducted. Here, this is what was found. Here's the evidence that we have. The quote is not a single drop of blood. So here's the animal, the poor animal. I don't know if you can tell here, but it has been drained. There's no more fat, there's no more plumpness. It's dehydrated. One might say it's simply dehydrated. But the on the ground observers in Oregon in October of 2019 said that organs were missing. This is so typical of these events. Internal organs were missing with laser, and they'd been incised out or excised out, I guess, as in laser surgery, and that there are gouge marks in the ground where this thing had been dropped from. I mean, if you could do the physics, you could figure out at what height it must have been dropped. There's been at least one case where a cow landed head first, having been dropped from a great height, and its head was buried in the dirt, and they had trouble digging it out. So one big problem here that we talked about before the show, Stan, and one thing that Linda Moulton Howe talked about with the ranchers who made these discoveries. And by the way, furthermore, not only no blood or indication of animal attack, no indication of human foul play, no tire tracks, even in muddy conditions. This doesn't look muddy, but in other instances where there had been muddy conditions, no mud, no tracks, no nothing, no footprints, no evidence of any human contact or animal contact, just no contact. Yet here's the evidence that something very weird happened, and now the rancher is out ahead of steer. So Stan, if you were, did you ever ranch? Did you have
Oh yes,
cattle?
had cattle. Yes,
So if you
never.
came upon something like this, what would your reaction be?
Uh, well, that just looking at the picture, I would think that'd been dead for some time without the blood or gets in there. It looks like it's started to dehydrate. But the other thing that kind of what the photo is, and again, I don't know what time frame between the time the animal was killed to the time they found it.
It's like
But
immediately, like the next day or something. Typically
even
within a day or two, they know right away. This is.
okay,
I know what you're saying, but this isn't that. This isn't
but
natural decimation.
you would also expect uh, animals like coyotes or vultures to be preying or to get basically a free meal or carrion.
Yeah,
Uh,
animals stay away from this stuff.
yeah, that's what I'm.
Creeps them out,
Yeah,
apparently.
for some reason, like I said, what is about that mutilated animal that even the vultures would not or go near.
So
So
anyway,
that's just,
uh, all kind of reports from a rancher, I would say, is credible about their stock, their herds. That's what they know. That's their expertise. And for them to say to Linda Moulton Howe off the record decades ago that they didn't know what to do, they couldn't make an insurance claim. How are you going to have an adjuster come out and say to the adjuster, well, all I know is we saw lights over the pasture, and then the next day this. No
yeah,
blood, no tracks, no carnage, but internal organs and lips cut away, removed. And this wasn't just once, it happened again and again and again. It's a pattern. It's a pattern
and
for sure. It's a
if you're
chapter
right,
in my book,
yeah,
so
yeah,
this stuff is real, and it's being downplayed by the CIA as part of the "you must be crazy" narrative. You must be crazy to believe that ET would have any interest in a cow. That's one way to gaslight. Why would an ET have an interest in a cow? That's the wrong question. The right question would be, what interest do ETs have in cow tissue? What interest? Not why, but what. In other words, deflection is subtle. And to deflect, you ask the slightly wrong question to get people sidetracked to thinking about that slightly wrong question instead of what's really interesting, which is WTF, basically what WTF. Well, then everything changed. Everything in my world changed on April 27th, 2020. 2020. Is there an echo in here? 2020, the Pentagon officially declassified numerous videos from naval personnel, mostly airmen, Navy airmen, including the so-called Tic Tac video, where there was a UFO shaped like a Tic Tac, sort of oval, I guess. So at the same time that the Pentagon declassified several videos from years before that they'd been saying before were not true. Now they're saying we've declassified them so everybody can look at them. And by the way, these UFOs are real. We don't know what they are, where they came from, or what controls them, or what built them, but we know they're real. And the significance of that is twofold. One is that it validates all the citizen scientists, all the just plain folks observers who came before, every researcher who published a book or gave a talk, any person killed in the name of truth is now validated post what's that word I want? After their death.
Which
I can't even think of it.
posthumous? Posthumous?
It's close to that.
That's
In any event, after their death, we don't have to get that fancy. That UFOs are real, but it's partial disclosure. In 2020, during the pandemic, we had partial disclosure that Pentagon saying they're real, but we don't know where they're from. And because we don't know where they're from and implied we can't control them, they become an airspace threat. So now UFOs are made official and officially classified as an airspace threat, not only to military operations, but commercial aircraft. So that happened at the end of April 2020. And by the way, this is an image that the picture here is forward-looking radar, FLIR. It's a forward-looking radar image. It's a FLIR. And if you're a geek, you can get into all the stats they put on these. Official Navy photo. We've got, it's just nuts. They framed this UFO up. It's right here in the middle. It's illuminating. You'll note it's radiant. And it's got I want to call it a nipple. It's got a nipple right down here. Looks like it's round. Well, clearly it's round. Is it domed on top? Hard to say. But these things behave like any UFO. They can hover, they can swoop, they can dive, they go in and out of the water, in and out of the clouds. They flock, they fleet, they come by themselves, they split apart, and they take on all kinds of shapes. So that was late April. Go ahead.
That is one of the points I said, they went to discrediting, is you couldn't discredit your own pilots.
Right.
Depending on what plane they're flying, it's mostly to get a pilot trained, it's close to about $1 million, maybe more to get into that. So you can't go around telling your pilots you're crazy and having them leave the military because of the insulting their intelligence. Okay,
Yeah.
that's my point.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. So late April, the Pentagon disclosed. As early as May, 3 days later, no one cared. No one cared. People were worried about other things back in 2020, as you may recall. And what a perfect time to disclose such a profound truth. UFOs are real, my gosh. And people so blasé about it.
You got to remember, people was worried about COVID.
Yeah.
So that if you're going to declassify, that was a great time. You got another crisis going on, so it's not going to get the main news. It's important to us, but most people, like I said, the news was dominated with COVID.
Yep, and you couldn't say COVID. In fact, we may not even now be able to say it. I don't even know what's going on now. But look at the euphemism for COVID, for pandemic, scandemic, whatever you want to call it. Wild. 2020 has been so wild that the government just confirmed. In other words, wild is being tied into that. You must be crazy. But you know what was crazy? Lockdown.
Yeah. Oh yes.
That's what was actually crazy. So they snuck this little news article in. No one cared. People were caring about how they were going to pay the rent having been deemed non-essential and lost their job. That's what some people were thinking about. Other people were thinking about how they could spend their free money from the government for earning more money. People for the first time earned more money staying home and not working than they could earn going to work. And that, I think, catapulted the wave of entrepreneurship and turning the back on corporate America and office jobs. Offices are still having trouble getting employees back in the office. And why would you want to go back if you'd been dismissed as non-essential or told to go home because you're a health risk? Oh, now they want you back. Eh. What do you think, Stan?
Um, yeah, it's you get slapped in the face. And I said, "So why do you want to go back have that happen again? You kind of that's smart." I said that was a punch in the nose. I don't care to go back to that environment again.
I was astonished, frankly, that nobody cared. I was so astonished that nobody cared about UFO disclosure after a lifetime of working toward it, raising consciousness to get to that point where the government would actually come clean even a little bit. I was working for thedailyconspiracy.com back in 2019 and 2020. And on April 30th of 2020, I wrote an article for thedailyconspiracy.com. The Pentagon admits UFOs are real. Nobody cares. And the first paragraph, despite this absolutely stunning, shocking, world-shattering, paradigm-shifting news, most people don't give a toot because they are grappling with the new world order, the old world having been upended by fear-inspired socioeconomic policies that restrict our civil liberties.
Yeah, it's I just want to say we had much more on our plate than the UFOs.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that
yeah,
was timed perfectly, wasn't it? As we've
yeah,
already
exactly.
mentioned a couple times here. Yeah, timing's everything, right? So the Pentagon came out and they validated what one of the first military insiders had published in 1950. Now remember, Pentagon disclosed in 2020, 70 years earlier, American Marine Corps naval aviator and whistleblower Major Donald Kehoe published his first book, The Flying Saucers Are Real. He had retired from the military and gone and turned whistleblower before people were, well, actually, I don't know when people started using that word. I shouldn't say that. In any event, he was a whistleblower. And the government didn't persecute him because they figured the truth seemed so outlandish. Even in 1950, the propaganda mill had been turning long enough that Kehoe's claims seemed preposterous to the average person who'd already been conditioned you must be crazy to believe in UFOs, and don't if you don't renounce UFOs, then we're going to persecute you. Kehoe went ahead anyway. Kehoe was so moved by what he knew that he published and started whistleblowing in earnest and basically helped launch UFO conventions and consciousness raising events. He was a keynote speaker at a lot of these things. And if you look on YouTube, you can find some video of him at press conferences too. He was a major player as the UFO story began to unfold in the United States, for better and for worse. So hats off to Donald Kehoe. You are validated, sir, if not vindicated. We never got that apology. Pentagon has never said, "Oh, and we're sorry for defaming all of you people for 70 years." No, we never got that.
And it'll never happen.
No, it'll never happen. Not holding my breath. So Major Kehoe was not a civilian scientist per se, but there were lots of civilian scientists over the years, over the decades, who came forward, including Betty and Barney Hill, whom we've covered on Taboo Topics with Gene and Stan on a Monday night. They were civilians. He worked for the post office, and she worked for social services for the welfare department of New Hampshire. They were out driving one night. She called a UFO over, and it came, and it abducted them, and they had a story to tell. Just one of countless stories. The first highly publicized story in the United States, but many, 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 many more to follow. Invariably ridiculed, snickered at by the news reporters if they ever even put them on the news. But amongst the first really credible citizen scientists, of whom there were many, 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 was Billy Meyer. And I'm showing an actual photograph taken by Billy Meyer on his property in Switzerland. He grew up in Switzerland. He began to have close encounters with aliens at age 5, by his own report. And there are plenty of witnesses on his farm of UFOs. However, no one outside of the farm, well, I should say no one outside of the farm. It would be easy for people outside of the farm who didn't see what those people saw to debunk. And that's what happened. Lots of debunking happened. So Billy Meyer claims that from 1942, when he was 5, to 1964, he communicated with a certain ET until that ET died, and then other ETs of that ET's race. And then there was a silence basically until 1975, when the granddaughter of the original ET communicated with him, and contact with her and other entities has continued to the present day. And as far as I know, he is still alive. I did not see any indication that he has died. So here's a photo that was auctioned off at Sotheby's, a very famous international auction house in Europe. Has been validated and verified as an actual photograph that he took. Okay, but now we can't validate for sure what this object is, but we do know that this is an analog photograph before digital photography. We know that. And so it hasn't been digitally enhanced in any way. Doesn't mean it wasn't faked or couldn't have been faked, because we have analog photos that were faked, that people set about to fake an analog photo and it looks convincing. Okay, that's one way to approach this. But Billy Meyer was always very forthright, and he showed many photographs of close up of discs posing, basically. And Betty Hill said the same thing decades after her first encounter with Barney, her husband. She said when she gathered people around to call UFOs, that they would say, be in a certain place at a certain time and have their cameras ready, because we'll be ready for a photo opportunity. And that's essentially what was going on with Billy Meyer. Have you heard of Billy Meyer? Because most people haven't, Stan.
And I'm one of them that haven't. So,
what do you make of this?
well, I say it's a look at the pictures, beautiful scenery, and like I said, you see the saucer. Yeah, no reason to think it's not. Every reason in the world to think it's real. Nothing there to give any indication that it's faked. So, yeah, like I said, the man took the picture. And it's just not. He didn't need it as a claim to fame.
Well, that's somewhat debatable, if only because part of his message seems to be of consciousness raising, that he did want some fame, he did want some notoriety, and that he knew he'd be greeted and treated with skepticism, but felt felt compelled and was instructed by these beings to tell all, soften the public up. In other words, we've talked before about what if the CIA's mandate had not been to deny, discredit, and distract, but had been to educate and inform and enlighten about the UFO presence? What if from 1947 in Roswell, the U.S. government had been far more forthright and not made the summary decision that the people of the United States couldn't handle the truth? You can't handle the truth. Some probably couldn't and still couldn't, but many could, many would, especially if you presented the information in a sly and clever way, which we now know the CIA is fully capable of doing. In other words, the propaganda could have been swiveled 180 degrees in the opposite direction and gone the way of ET phone home. That ET are nice, they're good. We don't need to fear them just because we can't control them in our airspace. If they meant harm, they would have destroyed us by now. There's all kinds of ways to approach the topic of UFOs and ETs. Our government took a very well, the military took a very militant posture, which, of course, they would. Military is not known for pacifism,
No,
right?
it's a threat, or that's how if it's unknown, it's a threat. Now, if they've been from the very beginning, say this is something, and then we do not know what it is. We're investigating, but there is something out there.
Oh, there is for sure.
Would we be any further down the road? Whatever reasons, the beings limit their contact with who they contact or who they talk to on Earth or visit with. Why are they holding back? Or they think they were not that far along as a civilization? We can't handle their exposure? That's my question.
And it's a good one. So while you've been talking, I've been showing another declassified Navy image. I think it's really important that everyday people see some of these images because it's not on our radar, so to speak. The average person has very little interest in UFOs. The average person is now not worried about lockdown, but worried about the rent payment and credit card debt and what's going on with the cost of living outpacing wages if you're fortunate enough to have a job in this day and age. So that's another potent form of mind control, creating problems that are so big they demand people's attention, even though, in my opinion, UFO reality is one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story of our age, of our existence. It's critical. It's critical to our understanding of where we come from and our place on Earth, our place in the universe. And I know I'm a little fanatical about it, but that's how I roll.
Mhm.
So here's a UFO the Navy this classified over some water, and here is the Russian counterpart. Okay, meaning here's an image from Russia of a UFO over water. It's different. It appears to be different. However, it certainly does seem to glint as if it were metallic. And just like we're at the optometrist, here's the U.S. image. Here's the Russian image. It could be the same object. It's hard to say if this cone, like this, looks like the pointy part, the cone part of a space shuttle re-entering, or some sort of spacecraft that would re-enter and have to withstand high heat and forces. If that, so we're looking at this basically sideways. What if this is a head-on image? And this is all speculation on my part. Here's a more head-on image of possibly the same thing. Is is this round? Is it a cone? It's hard to tell from the shadowing. There's some sort of, apparently, a light source here, or a light on this object. It's hard to say. The the resolution of these images leaves a lot to be desired. And you have to wonder, in as much as these are sourced from a military source, have they been doctored for the public, as in pixelated, smudged? Are or was this thing so fast and so far that this was as good as an image as they could get?
I've seen aerial combat from World War II. They had a lot more detail than these pictures, so I begin to think they have been smudged, digitally smudged, to maybe there's some detail they don't want us to see there. So yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Might have been doctored a bit.
Yes.
Hmm. So here's the physician. Hello, Toy Boat. Here's the official position today. I have to look again. May 6th, 2024. The United States government, through the Pentagon, is saying that UFOs are real. The hardware is real. The spacecraft are real. They're an unknown object and they are threats as such. But there mum's the word. Complete silence on who built these things and where those beings come from, which is very interesting if you happen to believe that those beings who built and build these craft are collaborating with world governments as we speak. This is all very weird. It's still a very weird situation to be in, this partial disclosure. Yeah, they're real, but there was, I'm just shrugging my shoulders in case you're not actually watching me. I'm just going to quote a couple headlines that came out. Let's see, this was Dateline, Friday, June 25th, 2021. So this was a year and some months after the Pentagon disclosure. And this is out of The Guardian from Britain. And the headline is, "They're real, but are they alien? Key takeaways from the Pentagon report." So they're picking apart the Pentagon report. They're showing some images of UFOs, and they're saying, yeah, the 9-page long report, boy, that was comprehensive, says they're real, whatever they are, but it doesn't say, it doesn't say they're extraterrestrial. It doesn't make any comment about where they might be from. They're just saying, we don't know. We don't know. In other words, they're ignoring all the citizen science and military intel that's gone before, that's saying, uh, yeah, there's beings that built these things, and you know they have telepathy, they can control our emotions, they can wipe our memories. They are powerful beings, and it would make sense that powerful beings would build powerful equipment.
It's just kind of a partial release. It's almost a distraction. Okay, yeah, we have the UFOs, and then these other questions that would fall with it. It's kind of like, obviously they can deny that part or say it's not possible. So no, we just know these things are out here. What about these other questions? Well, we probably know the answer, but we're not going to release it now.
Another headline from The Guardian about the same time: Pentagon confirms leaked photos and videos of UFOs are legitimate. So, in other words, those Tic Tac videos had been leaked, and the government response was to deny, discredit, distract, as usual. But then, in an unexpected reversal, came out and said, yeah, they're real after all. Who would have thunk it?
So is that the tip of the iceberg? That there's there's much more behind it, but how much are they going to? What's their basis that they released information on? Is it something they can no longer deny? That they can no longer deny the UFOs existing? Now, as we have more contact with the beings, will then that come out that yes, there's something else out. These beings are out there. They're coming from somewhere else. At what point does that information, will they disclose that? Always been told it's very expensive for a government to keep a secret. But again, at what point do you say, okay, they are, ET is here among us? And then
Well,
may
yeah,
ask,
it's very expensive to keep a secret. Let me interject. But, in the 1950s, the budget for CIA black ops, which would include UFOs operations, deny, discredit, distract, that the reporting was that millions of dollars were being spent in the 50s, early 60s. That number grew to billions, and now it's trillions. I may misspeak. Went from millions to billions. There's certainly billions of dollars being spent on black ops,
mhm,
and therefore, yeah, it's expensive, but the money's there, and the taxpayers are ponying it up.
yes. So shouldn't the taxpayers at some point be able to um, seek disclosure of it? But that's kind of part of the problem is, who do you disclose? Who do you go to get the information from? Remember reading about, I believe it was President Clinton. He said, I want to know about the UFOs. And every place he turns, said, well, it's this organization, or it's not us, it's this one. It's just like a circular firing squad. Nobody, everybody was pointing to everybody else, but nobody had any answers. Even the president could not make any progress at the time on, I want to know what these are. And again, there just was no disclosure. So somebody,
Someone has to go ahead.
I'm just saying, somebody, people out there know, but for other reasons, they're not going to let it go. Even though we are taxpayers, politicians, they control the information for some reason. They're not going to let it go.
So maybe the
Person,
next step is the final scene from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is beings coming out of the well, who knows? This could be happening ongoing. This was set at they're showing the director's cut of Close Encounters of the Third Kind on Samsung TV. Unlikely place, but that's happening. And I watched it, I think last night, in fact, night or two ago, very recently here. And the director's cut is even more stunning the than what I remember from seeing in the theater first time around. And I've watched it a few times over the years, but it's become iconic, and rightfully so. The next step in UFO disclosure from the United States government is ET is real too. ET is real. Well, what's it going to take? It took leaked video from Navy personnel to get the government to admit that the hardware is real. Is there video to leak of beings? Right? I guess that's the real question. We've got that guy Grush, military intelligence. I think his first name's David, who's being interviewed saying,
mm,
we've got craft and we've been reverse engineering them. Right? Bob
yes,
Lazar was saying that from the 1980s. Go ahead,
yes,
Stan.
yes. No, I'm disagreeing. Yes, I've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, like I said, this, we're being spoon-fed information for whatever reason. The ones that control the information just don't want to get out right now for whatever reason.
Yeah, and what's really interesting to me is how no one talks about the fact that the United States military has been busy forming up new branches, Space Force,
Mhm.
and new committees to study this UFO phenomenon, which they're now even giving a new acronym, UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. to further obfuscate the matter, make it even harder to understand. Let's muddy the water. Everybody knew what a UFO was. That's why I continue to use the term UAP. It's artificial. It's mind control. We don't want you remembering we don't want you remembering Betty and Barney Hill and their UFO abduction. We don't want you remembering Travis Walton and his UFO abduction. We don't want you remembering anybody in their UFO abduction. It wasn't a UFO, it was a UAP. That's our story and we're sticking to it. But what's really curious is that the United States military tells the public it has not availed itself of any citizen scientists. Anyone who's done research for decades on the problem, they claim to have basically unknowns on their committees. No one we ever heard of. No one in ufological research has heard of any of these people, and we might or might not. But they all act like they act as if they have new people on all these committees that have they've just been tossed a memo. Here, learn all you can about UFOs on the weekend, because Monday you got a briefing, and then you're going to start studying this stuff. And by the way, we have 150 reports. Now 500 reports. A really small number compared to the actual number of reports from the decades from citizen scientists. And by scientists, I don't mean someone who's got a Dexter's Laboratory lab in their basement. I'm talking about average people who are not technically trained observers, but who saw something. And like Stan said earlier, they know what they saw. They know what they saw. And that belief will not be shaken. So who knows what's next? Any guesses, Stan?
If they're forming committees like that, people with zero experience, they expect nothing out of them. Here, read all these reports. You don't have any experience. You don't have any sightings that you can relate to, but you're going to read about all these. So they're not expecting anything out of these committees. It's just going to kind of thrashing about, and nothing's going to come out from them because they don't have the experience, or they haven't made any personal observations, and they're not going to go outside and talk to citizen scientists.
Or maybe they do have the experience, but they don't even display that. I mean, it's so spy versus spy versus spy.
Yes.
Maybe they're highly experienced, but they're just not allowed to talk about it. It's who can know? Who can know what's going on? We've been lied to so much, it's hard to believe anything at this point. And furthermore, there's apathy about the topic. We don't care. We, the people of the United States, don't care about UFOs. We are trying to pay our bills.
Like I said, that's one way to control the people. If you don't have any money, you're going to be doing this scrambling to get money. You don't have time for anything else.
So true, so true. Well, I invite everyone within broadcast range to check out my book on Amazon, Unknown Objects, the top 10 U.S. UFO cases. I've talked about cattle mutilations in there, and also Roswell. It's in chronological order, so they would be reversed. But by the way, it's a free read if you've got Kindle Unlimited. Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion because I really think it's important that we raise consciousness about what's going on at the government level and how they're messing with us. They just continue to mess with us. And every day it's some different mess.
Information is not in the central. It occurs at the edge.
Now that's interesting. Where'd you hear that?
This an observation of my own. Like the change occurs at the edge. I think information occurs at the edge.
Well, that's really interesting. I might have to steal that if you don't mind.
You're welcome to. But members of our network that tune in to listen, I said I think those are ones that go out and find this information that's out there on the edge. I want to say cutting edge, but it's not mainstream. This stuff you got to dig for.
True that. Very true. Well, I spy with my little eye that it's top of the hour, so
Yeah.
let us wrap it up here. I've really enjoyed this discussion. I'm shouting at everybody in the audience, and I know more people will be listening to us after the fact. We stream out to multiple platforms. Thanks to the Rift Nation Network. Any final thoughts, Stan?
Is this where I say goodnight, Stan?
It might well be.
No, I think it is. So,
Well, go ahead.
well, good night, Stan, and thanks everybody for tuning in and watching us. We
And good
appreciate
night,
it.
Gene.
There you go.
We'll see y'all next week. It's Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray, only on the Rift Nation Network, Monday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Do the math. We'll see you next week.